A year is a long time in politics. I'm Henry Riley and welcome to LBC's review of 2023. In January, you'll be forgiven for forgetting who the Tory party chairman was. The first of three this year, Nadhim Zahawi, found himself on the scrap heap over his tax affairs. But it was a story about Rishi Sunak's seatbelt that ate up more column inches. JamesObrien didn't let the PM's law-breaking slide.
For a safe pair of hands, he sure breaks a lot of laws, doesn't he? And he is categorically breaking the law. He managed to somehow get himself filmed in the back of a car without anybody involved noticing that he wasn't wearing a seatbelt, which, in his defence, has only been against the law since, I think, 1991. I've checked, and you do not get a special dispensation from wearing seatbelts in the back of the car if your dad used to be a doctor. Initially I thought that might be he'd just come out and he'd say, no, don't worry, I know that you're supposed to wear a seatbelt in the back of a car, but my dad used to be a doctor. But apparently that gives you no special dispensations whatsoever. And I think rather cleverly, or not even cleverly, just pertinently, the courts correspondent of the Evening Standard newspaper has this morning shared details of some people who have committed similar or even perhaps identical crimes. And it is far from rare. Tomorrow, a 59-year-old woman, let me just check that actually for you. I beg your pardon. Today, this is breaking, #breaking. A 59-year-old woman from Ilford is being prosecuted for not wearing a seatbelt while riding in the back of the car. Tristan Kirk of the Evening Standard tells us that people get prosecuted for this kind of thing every day. A brief error of judgment, perhaps, but one taken seriously by police forces. In fact, she is one of at least 6 people in London alone being prosecuted for this offence this week. Last week, a 42-year-old man from Dagenham. Why do they all come from Essex? Why do people never wear seatbelts? What is it about Essex? It's a joke, don't at me. A 42-year-old man from Dagenham was convicted of the same crime. He received a £220 fine, plus an £88 victim surcharge and £100 in costs. 2 weeks ago, a 37-year-old woman from Lewisham, oh, thank goodness for that, was fined £40 with £40 costs and a £34 surcharge. She entered a guilty plea and possibly mitigation, so her penalty was much lower. They never get news coverage, obviously, but they do happen. And they do happen a lot. So that is story number one. How far up your nose does that get? Do we want to hear a bit of Rishi? Is this Rishi Sunak explaining himself? Or is this just from the actual... I don't know why he does these things. They don't, in my humble opinion, make him sound good. They make him sound like it's as if he's sort of... Well, we've already described him as a supply teacher who's asked the pupils to think of him more as a friend than a teacher.
Hi. One of my New Year's promises to you was to grow the economy, and today we're announcing the second round of allocations from our Levelling Up Fund, and that's about investing in local areas.
That's enough. That's enough. It's awful. The thing is, what he accidentally did was announce that he was breaking the law at the time by not wearing a seatbelt in the back of a car, a crime which would see an ordinary Joe facing up about a £220 fine unless there were mitigations. So I think what we have here is a question about double standards, a question about hypocrisy, and a question about, for example, why corners of the British media spent weeks screeching hysterically about a photograph taken illegally, oddly. The bloke who took the photograph was trespassing, of Keir Starmer categorically and clearly not breaking the law. And today, footage of Rishi Sunak clearly and categorically breaking the law is being greeted with calls to move along and nothing to see here.
February saw Nicola Sturgeon announce her resignation as the leader of the SNP, but it was another leader of sorts in the form of social media personality Andrew Tate that dominated online headlines. Tate gained notoriety for promoting an ultra-masculine lifestyle to his followers, much to the dismay of Shelagh Fogarty.
You think he's a positive force? Tell me why.
Absolutely. I mean, it's important to critically evaluate Andrew Tate in all aspects of life. Although he's a political troll and he does tweet out things like Greta Thunberg on Twitter, he's immensely helped a huge amount of young men's lives and has helped them become better men, has empowered masculinity, has got them in the gym, has promoted self-accountability and provides an opposite side to the left-wing society that the West is now seeing.
Empowered masculinity by getting people to the gym. Is that masculinity? Big muscles?
Absolutely. It requires responsibility. It requires self-accountability. It requires discipline, consistency. What else is more important in life?
Oh, yes, but they're not uniquely masculine traits, are they?
No, masculinity, going to the gym and teaching these skills from a young age is important. So men don't become weak men when they're older. So no excuses are made.
Physically weak.
And he does that from a young age.
Physically weak or morally weak or both?
Both.
And what about
look at what happens. Look at what happens when men can't control their emotions in the West. You have school shootings such as in America.
This
is what happens.
Do you think that his comments on women and what he urges young boys and men to do to women, the women in their lives, do you think that is a positive force?
I think what he says and what goes through people's head are two different things. He said that men and women are both needed in society. They go yin and yang together. If you have traditionally masculine men and traditionally feminine women, society is proven at its best. Look at the societies in the West right now, England and the United Kingdom. London is a failing city at every metric. Dubai and other parts of the East, which are regarded by the UK as apparently misogynistic, as we've seen through Qatar and how the West have portrayed that. So many people have come back from Qatar saying it's been an amazing place.
But can I ask you to be specific? You've been specific about what you think the benefits of lifelong physical strength and discipline are, and I wouldn't disagree with you about discipline and consistency and commitment. They're important for boys and girls, men and women. There are fantastic human traits to keep a life on track, no doubt. But why the exhortations to physically hurt and mentally hurt women and girls? Why throw that into the mix?
So there actually has been no instance of where he has seriously meant that he has hurt women in any metric possible. Earlier you mentioned that.
What do you mean in any metric possible? What does that mean?
There has been no instance where any woman has come forward against Andrew Tate and said that
I don't need them to. I've got the words.
So you don't need evidence?
No, I've got the evidence in front of me. This is a man
what is the evidence?
I've got it right in front of me if you'll hear me out. This is a man who goes online and sends out videos and has huge numbers of people following him because essentially he's created a kind of pyramid scheme financially to attract people to it. And he has said, and you know the physical sort of demeanour of the big cigar and the riches and the cars and all the rest of it. That's the backdrop. But these are the words. Controlling women, trashing their belongings, stopping them from going out in order to control their behaviour. And this is a quote from him now. It's bang out the machete, boom, in her face, grip her by the neck, shut up, bitch. Apologies for that. That's what he says in one video, acting out how he'd attack a woman if she accused him of cheating. In another, he describes throwing a woman's possessions out of the window to teach her a lesson. In a third, he calls an ex-girlfriend a dumb hoe. Again, apologies to people for the language. He has encouraged all kinds of physical methods of controlling a woman. He has exhorted people to violence and physical and mental control of the woman in their life and the women in their lives. And you're unmoved by that, Jonathan.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you grab these quotes. The machete.
But I didn't make them up.
No, you didn't make them up.
He said them.
But you didn't take into the context of which they were said.
Tell me the context.
So
tell me the context.
They were said in a jokey manner. The difference is when it's chopped up into a 30-second or 10-second TikTok clip and young men digest that, that's not his problem. They haven't read the whole context.
Women bear responsibility for being raped?
So that is one thing I don't personally agree with him, but that doesn't mean he's not an overall net positive for men as a whole.
I've actually watched a lot of his content, Jonathan, since I first talked about him on air, and now, as true to form, it just comes up when I'm on Instagram because of how algorithms work, and I haven't quite worked out how to control that yet. But he's not just joking. It's not banter. It's deeply serious. He is training and guiding and exhorting boys and men to behave like this towards the women in their life.
Absolutely not. He is not.
I'm telling you that he is, Jonathan, because I've watched it.
Sure.
He isn't joking. It's not slapstick. He's not joking.
Okay, sure. So I've been watching him for a few years, way before he's blown up. And I've noticed the increasing trend in people such as yourself saying this. But where's the sufficient evidence for any woman coming out against him? It's odd that he got banned off Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
That's not the point. Jonathan, that isn't the point.
It's odd that he got banned off that, but then ISIS members and members of the Iran regime are still on Twitter and Facebook. Do you think that's morally correct? Do you think our children should be seeing people get their heads chopped off?
No, I don't. But I do not. Of course I don't. But I'm glad. By the way, I'm not talking about banning him from anything. I'm talking about what we do when people put, and I'm glad you've mentioned ISIS because I think his MO is similar. It is a form of radicalising of particularly young people, but clearly in your case, not just young people. He is attempting to bring into he's succeeding in bringing into common parlance in schools, in homes across presumably the world because of the way the internet works, certainly in the home of Karen, who we spoke to 10 minutes ago. He is inculcating violence against women and girls, attitudes that are deeply misogynistic and completely out of date in any normal Western mind. And it's working. That's the problem. It's working.
Yeah, sure. So you keep saying the same rhetoric again, misogynistic, etc., etc.
I'm not, Jonathan. I'm not giving you rhetoric.
Sure.
I'm telling you what the mother of a 13-year-old boy is dealing with in her home. Don't just say sure. Answer it. I'm not giving you rhetoric. I'm telling you, I'm reporting to you what the mother and father of a 13-year-old boy have told me, and they're not the only ones. And I can see calls coming in from people experiencing the same. So it isn't rhetoric, Jonathan. It's happening. It's coming into people's living rooms via their smartphones. Right. What do we do about it?
Why can't people take to the good, he says? Why are they not seeing all the good things he says about self-accountability, about making more money? He has personally helped me through his apparently pyramid scheme to Hustle.
How's he helped you? Tell me.
Because I've left my job.
And?
I am now Sorry?
And what did you do?
Before, I was working in...
Yeah, tell me the story.
I was a part of his pyramid scheme, which is completely not a pyramid scheme. One part of his Hustlers University is an affiliate marketing area where there's also 11, 12 other areas where verified millionaires will also teach you how to become wealthy. Now, people don't want to see that. They just want to attack him for the pyramid scheme.
How have you become wealthy? Have you?
Yes.
How?
Because I've managed to leave my job at the age of 23 years old. I'm in the greatest physique in my life. I take utmost self-accountability, and I'm moving out of the Western countries I am placed in now in the next 3 months.
And that doesn't sound like a job. How do you work now to become rich?
Oh, so I was a part of his methods of creating wealth. So, for example, he does copywriting, he does stock trading, he does crypto trading.
Could you translate that for me into what you do and how it earns you money?
Yes, we stock trade. We look at companies that are going to increase in value over time, and we trade that. We also day trade. And we also copyright, so we write marketing and sales emails for companies.
Yeah. Right. And how much have you earned as a result of that, would you say, broadly speaking?
Well, put it this way, I was earning about, after taxes, probably 9K before, and now I'm well over that, and I can provide for my family, and I'm only 23 years old.
What family have you got?
What do you mean, what family have I got?
What do you mean by family? Do you mean a wife, children? Do you mean your mum and your dad and your siblings? What do you mean by family?
So my mum and my siblings. So I've retired my mother, and I also have taken care of my
You have retired your mother?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Is she a racehorse?
She doesn't have to work. She doesn't have to... Sorry?
Is she a racehorse?
Is it not good to take care of your family?
No, just the language is interesting. You have retired your mother.
I have retired my mother. She doesn't have to work a day in her life again because of her son.
And she's happy.
She is extremely happy about that. She gets to pursue all her passions.
And how would you feel about somebody being online thinking, well, she's got all that time on her hands now. You want to keep her under control. You should hit her a couple of times to keep her under control. You should throw her possessions out of the window. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no. So again,
you find it funny.
I find it funny that you keep using this one example, which is proved completely untrue.
Well, it hasn't. Well, you see, now you're just lying. It hasn't proved completely untrue because it's there. It's there on the internet.
Guilty?
No. It's
unproven
there.
guilty?
It's there for people to see.
March saw Suella Braverman hit the front pages, not for the last time, after she introduced the illegal migration bill. A number of people voiced their disapproval, but none caused more of a stir than football legend Gary Lineker, whose comments comparing the policy to 1930s Germany saw him, briefly, ousted from his gig at the BBC. Now, while many jumped to Lineker's support, Andrew Castle found his behaviour to be a step too far.
I was with Gary Lineker for half a day plus on Thursday. I was working with him and his phone was going absolutely mad. I said to him that I thought that to draw the parallels between, the rise of Nazism in the 30s, an early 30s government, and the immigration policy of a serving Conservative Party was a step too far, and he agreed, and he said so. So he's alluded to that. If he was to apologise, then fine. I suspect he could go back on air, but it's gone a little bit too far for that. And let me just say this: how badly does Gary Lineker need the BBC right now? Guy's absolutely loaded. He's making himself fantastically popular amongst a lot of people. He's a media mogul pretty much already. He's got a film company, Goldhanger Films. He's got the podcast business. Massive profile. He's 61 years of age, fit and well. And, how bad does he need the platform of Match of the Day? Don't know, really. You can bring in the free speech argument if you like. 0345 6060 Did he have a right to say what he did and to hold the opinion as strongly as he did and to broadcast that opinion on his own personal Twitter account? I don't have his contract in front of me. I can't answer that question. But if you are going to use that argument, would you have used, or did you use the same argument for the likes of Jeremy Clarkson? Or is this a left-right part of the culture wars that we're all enduring? It's all over the newspapers, and even though there are certainly far more important stories than this. For instance, Mr. Hunt, we can learn from Swedish lockdown. That's relegated. I mean, it's ridiculous. Zaporizhia nuclear plant getting bombed by the Russians. We're not even talking about it. The migrant bill itself, the 480 million quid agreement with France that we'll pay them over the next, I think it's 3 years. All of it is relegated. It's a good talking point, this. It shouldn't be the main story. It is.
In April, Robert Jenrick became the latest MP to struggle behind the wheel as he was handed a 6-month driving ban for speeding. But it was his colleague Dominic Raab who was the next MP on the chopping block after an inquiry found that he acted in an intimidating and insulting manner with civil servants.
He implied that if he had been bullying, which of course he wasn't, he was doing it on your behalf. You heard me right, folks. Your behalf. Let me tell you something. If we let this go on, if we don't analyse it, and we don't think carefully about how we're being manipulated, it will happen time and time and time again. So today, I'm going to hand you the tools to ensure that as Raab continues this campaign, when the next one who resigns does it, and the one after that, you're able to just call it out. Dominic Raab did an interview on the BBC last night. First, he denied that he'd bullied anyone.
Almost all of the complaints against me were dismissed. And what this doesn't give you, it's a handful of very senior officials. None of the junior complaints were upheld. And I got on and dealt with hundreds of civil servants, thousands of other people in prison service and the court service.
So, stage 1, you heard it, deny. He then moved on to stage 2 of the Trumpian playbook, divert. Divert attention away from his egregious behaviour and then go on the attack.
And what you've got is the risk here of a very small minority of very activist civil servants with the passive-aggressive culture of the civil service who don't like some of the reforms, whether it's Brexit, whether it's parole reform, whether it's human rights reform, effectively trying to block government. That's not on, that's not democratic.
That's not on, that's not democratic, he says. Can you see what he's doing there? Can you see it? He's casting himself as your saviour. If he was hard, if he was intimidating, if he bullied, it was for you. That's his strategy. So, he is denied, he's diverted, he's attacked. So there's Raab saying there are a small, dangerous, aggressive group of civil servants blocking the will of the people. Where have you heard that before? This is where.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing.
Did you hear it? Did you hear it? Alex, let's change course. That Raab divert clip. Play it again.
And what you've got is the risk here of a very small minority of very activist civil servants with the passive-aggressive culture of the civil service who don't like some of the reforms, whether it's Brexit, whether it's parole reform, whether it's human rights reform, effectively trying to block government. That's not on, that's not democratic.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing.
Did you hear it? That's not me, that's them. This is the Trump playbook, and it's now infected British politics. The only difference is not the substance here, it's the tone. Trump, standing up all alpha male, pointing and shouting and turning red. Dominic Raab, alpha male, sitting down, politely, suited and booted, whispering. Whispering Dominic Raab. Here's whispering Dom, doubling down on how he's the victim. And if he bullied staff, which he didn't, it was for your benefit. Because democracy is what's at stake.
Look, I'm sure I've made mistakes over 4.5 years, but the question was whether any of this amounted to bullying. And I strongly believe if the threshold for bullying is so lowered that picking people up on bad work, straightening out a negotiation where breach of a cabinet set mandate has been taken place, changing teams so we get the very best out of negotiations, so we deliver on victims' parole, human rights reform. If we can't do those things, then ultimately it will be the public that pay the price.
You're right, whispering Dom. The public are paying the price. And I'll tell you how we are paying it. We are paying it by just tacitly, silently, without us being fully conscious of it, sleepwalking our way into a place here in the UK where Trumpian-style politics becomes the norm. But we don't do it like the Americans. We don't do it shiny and shouty with flags. We don't do it by storming the Capitol or getting people to march down Whitehall. No. Our politicians do it with shiny shoes and a sharp suit, sitting there on BBC News, not properly challenged, whispering the message. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. And if I did, it was their fault. It was the process. It was the rules. It was them. They made me do it. They made me. They made me intimidate. They made me double down on them, make them feel as though they can't do their jobs. They made me do it. That's what he's doing. Don't be in any doubt. This programme on LBC is not falling for it. We're not going to debate for the next hour whether or not he was or wasn't a bully. Dominic Raab has been found to have been a bully on 2 occasions. That's too many. He's fallen on the sword that he said he would fall on. And I'm not going to sit here and debate whether or not that was right. He did it. Own it.
It was all eyes on the Coronation in May. Thousands gathered on the streets of London to celebrate the crowning of King Charles III. Though not everyone went wild for Corrie Bobs, as a handful were arrested for their protests. Natasha Devon heard from one caller seeking to put the record straight.
This idea that's been put about, that there was anything there that was remotely related to locking in, that is garbage. Utter garbage. I'm sorry, if this was Russia, I would call it disinformation.
Tom has called from Brighton. What would you like to say?
Well, hello, thank you for taking my call. You'll hear my voice is my voice is rather hoarse from all the chanting I did this morning in Trafalgar Square. I'm a member of Republic. Excuse me. Republic is a very small organisation, entirely peaceful and Democrat. It's devoted to democracy, so it uses peaceful democratic means. Yeah. I say it's a small organisation. Therefore, I, as an ordinary member of it, just doing my bit, in where I live, I was assigned the job this morning of overseeing the distribution of those placards which were, I thought about it before calling in, which were stolen by the police. I should have been at that van, in fact, but I hadn't yet heard. I arrived there before 7 o'clock this morning, and I should have been there at the van to help take the van, the placards out and so on. Now, I'd like to make 2 points, if I may. First of all, this idea that's been put about that there was anything there that was remotely related to locking in, that is garbage, utter garbage. I'm sorry, if this was Russia, I would call it disinformation.
Okay.
That is not what Republic does. This protest had been negotiated, discussed by Graham Smith, our chief executive, who was arrested this morning. He had led negotiations with the Metropolitan Police for 6 months in advance, and everything was agreed about how we would do it, what would be done, including the placards, as you said earlier, and also to have perhaps music and speeches. MPs were invited. We had a sound system which was also arrested. You don't often hear sound systems being arrested, but it was.
Wow.
Now, that was done surreptitiously while everything was going on. My second point is there are lots and lots, naturally, of foreign journalists there, and naturally they were doing their job as journalists, and they were interviewing us in the crowd, asking us why we were there and what we thought about things. Now, the basic explanation that I gave, and this is very important to understand what a kind of occasion this was, that was a political event.
Yep.
The King is the head of state of this country. That is the most senior political position in the country. Our objection to it is entirely on the grounds of democracy. So to attack us in this undemocratic way, that is, as you say, extremely worrying. Our argument is quite simply the head of state, position of head of state, like other positions in what calls itself, what has the arrogance to describe itself as the mother of democracies, and look what happened this morning, that job should be elected. Like we elect our MPs, on Thursday we elected our local councillors and so on. That is what that, and obviously we're only going to use democratic means to argue that case. That's it. Now, this ceremony today, this archaic medieval ceremony which exists nowhere else in the world, that was the equivalent in this country of the investiture of the President of the United States. Now imagine, in the United States, of course, they have their First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech. So supposing in 2017, at the investiture of Donald Trump, people who come along protesting against him. Now, we weren't protesting against the king as such, not him individually.
Right.
Our argument is about the procedure, the institution, the idea that this job should be held by members of only one family because they have held it for centuries and centuries in the past. That this man should have been given that job because his mother had it for 70 years before him and before her father, and so on, back into the mists of time. How can you have a system like that in what's called a democracy? Now, this was this coronation college and investiture. It was a ceremony. A political ceremony. And we wanted to say, we don't think this is right because this is not a democratic institution and we believe in democracy. That's why we were there, with our wanting to show our placards. Fortunately, very many of the people who were there in the crowd had brought their own placards instead. And what we did instead of instead of having our speeches, there was at least one MP who was invited to give a speech and expected to do so. That had been approved by the police. Instead, we just had our voices. So we heard, fortunately, there was a very conveniently placed loudspeaker where we heard the coronation service going on, which gave us very good prompts to come with our chants and our boos and so on. And then when we saw, coming through Admiralty Arch or up Whitehall, we saw these people in these soldiers in their funny brass hats and what have you. That also, of course, made us want to react. And, that's what we were there for. Nothing more than that. We were there to express our opinion about what we saw in front of us and what we heard through that loudspeaker. As simple as that. We were prevented from doing so in the way that we had chosen and which had been agreed with the police.
Tom, you have, by anybody's measure, had a hell of a day. And so I can't thank you enough for picking up the phone and sharing your on-the-ground first-hand experience with us. Thank you so much for your call.
Thank you very much for listening and giving me the opportunity, because I think it's very important, if I may simply finish quickly. It is very important, obviously, that people in this country should understand what was happening on the ground from people who are taking part and not listen to this disinformation that's been put about, and also have a thought. And I spoke to journalists from Finland, from Ireland, from the United States, someone from Vanity Fair, from France, and I think one or two other countries. This has gone all around the world.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, this country has already, over the last 7 years, since that ludicrous referendum that we had about pulling ourselves out of the EU and the behaviour of our government since then, this country has acquired a dreadful reputation internationally. And this will only make it far, far worse.
June saw the Partygate investigation conclude that Boris Johnson deliberately misled the public. The latest act in the Johnson saga failed to impress Andrew Marr, and there was only one way to adequately voice his feelings: by writing a poem.
Oh, my friends, what a day it's been. Boris Johnson has this afternoon formally resigned from the Commons. He and Rishi Sunak are now at open war after the Prime Minister this morning accused him of trying to make him do improper things in his appointment of his cronies to the Lords.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to, either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises with people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
And in response to that, Boris Johnson said, quotes, Rishi Sunak is talking rubbish. Boys. In other news, a week after Mr Sunak claimed victory over Stop the Boats, on Sunday record numbers of people crossed the Channel, more than 600 in a single day. In Scotland, absolute meltdown as Nicola Sturgeon was arrested and then released without charge. Meanwhile, Silvio Berlusconi, the modern inventor in Italy of big dog, big daddy, macho populism, has died. Without Silvio, I think, no Trump, and perhaps no Brexit-era Johnson either. So much to talk about, but yet again, it is the single figure of Boris Johnson, the albino gorilla himself, who has been overshadowing the entire news agenda all day. And I have to tell you, I'm so bored of Boris Johnson, I could scream. It's hot. I'm like a boiling kettle ejecting steam. I am just so bored of Boris Johnson and his life. I know more about him than I do about my wife. The glory years of japes and pranks at Eton, the never giving up or knowing when he's beaten. The web of Oxford chums, Dave and George and Gove. The trysts with trusting girls in flats, hotels and groves. The lies he told to them, and then the lying to the Times long before the fatal porkies over party lockdown crimes. The shrugging off of misbehaviour with a laugh. The cripes, I'll make it up, reporting for the Telegraph. And words like cripes and chums and japes and pranks and yikes and bozzer. Enough, no more, no thanks. All that gobbling up of airtime and paper by the ream, as if we've all been jailed inside one man's mad dream. Oh, I'm so bored of Boris Johnson, I could scream. I'm so bored of Boris Johnson I could spew even the successes, for yes, there were of those a few. Genial, liberal Boris in the years at London City Hall, election winner against Ken and Corbyn, never short of gall, very fast to take the credit, e.g. Boris Bikes, e.g. Crossrail. He always wanted monuments. They wanted that to fail. He sliced through state bureaucracy that was Byzantine. At least I suppose they've called it the Elizabeth and not the Johnson line. Then his return to Parliament, prepared to oil and suck up to Tory leaders. I'm so bored of Johnson I could chuck. He always wanted to be lovable, like Paddington or Gromit, a cuddly national symbol. I'm so bored that I could vomit. He picks a thing up, caresses it, then wrecks it. And by thing, I'm thinking, obviously, of Britain and of Brexit, of whoppers, fibs and fraudulence and guile, and for his enemies, threats and menaces and bile. At birth, the angels gave him the gift of tongues, a glittering tree on which all life's prizes hung. They gave him great intelligence and sex appeal, strength of a grizzly bear, eyes of a baby seal. But then they said, we've given too lavish a gift list to baby Boris, so you will be as well a selfish narcissist, and everything will turn to dust. Bad, then badder will be your choices. The high call of politics, a ladder, no more than that, to clamber up. So nothing mattered, not voters conned, nor a once great party shattered. He wanted greatness. But yes, it's vanished like a dream. And sometimes I'm so bored of Boris Johnson, I could scream.
In July, the former PM dominated political headlines again after he failed to give the COVID inquiry access to his old WhatsApp messages. At the time, he claimed to have forgotten his password, an excuse that JamesObrien predicted just moments before it was made public.
The High Court had ruled that the messages should be shared with the inquiry, and they haven't been. Boris Johnson claims that somehow the security services have ordered him not to do it because it's not safe, which just sounds like nonsense. The BBC reported yesterday that government officials have attempted to help Mr. Johnson access the data on the phone while in the company of his representatives, but it's never been in the sole possession of the government as it belongs to Mr. Johnson. Inevitably, he said that he would have full cooperation and happy to disclose any material. But I think we might be coming close to the point. Don't shoot me down if I get this one wrong, all right? You know what my predictions are like. Pretty close to perfect lately. Well, since 2016, really. But how surprised would you be if the next chapter of this story involves nobody being able to remember the passcode? I don't know enough about phones. When my father passed away and I wanted to get into his BlackBerry, I couldn't. And I thought, I'll take it to one of those shops, you know. I'll take it to one of those market stores that says, we unlock phones and things like that. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't unlock phones. So I actually don't know what the technology is these days. But with that as a caveat, with my absolute admission of ignorance on the technological possibilities and otherwise, how stunned would you be if it emerged that Boris Johnson just couldn't remember the code to get his phone open anymore, or he'd lost his thumb? You could just about imagine him claiming that. Well, I was very keen to cooperate fully with the inquiry, but it is my phone is activated by my thumbprint, and unfortunately, through no fault of my own, I have lost my thumb. I have misplaced my thumb. Thummus Maximus has gone absentia, so I cannot open said phone with said thumb because said thumb has gone AWOL. Could you imagine Boris Johnson? I mean, not quite, but you wouldn't be too stunned, would you? So you've got a big problem here, I think, because that period up until May 2021 is crucial. It involves the period where he skipped 5 Cobra meetings. Does it involve it involves the period when he was reportedly at death's door himself, doesn't it? And you need to remember as well that the government didn't want it to be handed over. So this is a right old palaver. Because he keeps saying he's happy to do it. He's happy for them to see everything while not actually managing to provide the stuff he says that they're happy to see. Downing Street are saying that he hasn't really lost his thumb. Stop texting me. Downing Street are saying that they don't want this to be handed over for reasons of sensitivity, working on the principle that you cannot trust a single syllable that comes out of Boris Johnson's mouth ever. He probably doesn't want it to come out either. He's just saying that he does because A, it gives him the best result in the short term, and B, it embarrasses Downing Street. But why wouldn't they want it to come out? All of the other messages have been handed over. All of the other, it's just this one phone, this one collection of WhatsApp messages that has not been complied with. So you've got exchanges with Rishi Sunak, Simon Case, Matt Hancock, remember him, all sorts of people, but they're held on a mobile phone which has been turned off and securely locked away since May 2021. So have we got the time? Have we got the time that I said it this morning? So at about 5 minutes past 11 today, I'm sorry for getting so excited about this. I'm just relieved he hasn't lost his thumb. That would have been so embarrassing, wouldn't it? So quite breathtaking, really, that at approximately 5 minutes past 11 today, i.e. fewer than 40 minutes ago, right, I said this. Inevitably, he said that he would have full cooperation and happy to disclose any material. But I think we might be coming close to the point. Don't shoot me down if I get this one wrong, all right? You know what my predictions are like. Pretty close to perfect lately. Well, since 2016, really. But how surprised would you be if the next chapter of this story involves nobody being able to remember the passcode? 11:04, right? Give or take? Sorry, 11:05 and 34 seconds. 11:05 and 34 seconds. You can rewind live radio. There's never been a more exciting time to rewind live radio on the Global Player app. 11:05 and 34 seconds, I said that. And then at 11:41, Stephen Swinford at The Times reports exclusively that Boris Johnson has been unable to give the COVID inquiry WhatsApp messages from his old iPhone because he has forgotten the passcode. This is the only programme in Britain where you get the news before it has actually happened.
Bullies caused a stir once again in August, but Dominic Raab was nowhere to be found on this occasion. Instead, it was American XL bullies that got people talking, with calls for the dangerous dogs to be banned. One breeder spoke to Iain Dale, and it's fair to say his shock admission didn't land well.
These XL bullies is a different breed, trust me.
But why do you breed them?
Because I absolutely love dogs. I love dogs. I'm passionate about dogs. Absolutely.
Well, breed Jack Russells then.
Jack Russells. I've had 3 Jack Russells. I remember growing up. Little Bobby Harrison, we called him. Loved him to bits, but any type of dog. However, XL bullies. I'm sorry, Ian. Let's not beat around the bush. The people who own these dogs, the very vast majority, not all, I'll be honest, not all, but a lot of them, they walk around, not with leads, selling
it's got
things.
Nothing. No, I'm sorry, this has got nothing to do. This may have a little bit to do with leads, but that's not the whole story. I'm going to ask you a question now. When you decided to breed this type of dog, who were you aiming them at? Who did you want to sell them to, and who did you sell them to?
Drug dealers. I'll be absolutely honest, Ian.
You sold them to drug dealers?
I did.
Well,
you know what, Ian?
I'm tempted to end the call now.
No, I've always said this. Why do you need a licence for a dog and not for a cat? Because cats can't
Sorry,
drive.
You've just admitted that you bred them to sell them to drug dealers. What kind of person does that make you?
Ian, who's going to put bread on the table for my family? I've got 6 kids.
Oh, go to hell, David.
It was an interesting year for Susan Hall, who surprised everybody by becoming the Conservative Party's candidate for the next Mayor of London. Ms Hall's Twitter account was quickly scrutinised, with praise for Enoch Powell and Katie Hopkins causing a stir.
I'm from the Jewish community, and I was really disturbed to see you tweet in support of what Katie Hopkins said, referring to London under Sadiq Mayor as Londistan, suggesting that, our Muslim friends and neighbours are taking over London. So I was wondering, with that in mind, how are you planning to represent the great Muslim community of London?
Hello, Lauren. Well, actually, I'm glad you brought this up, because when I retweeted... Oh, no, I think I liked it. I don't know. This was a long time ago. That wasn't in my mind, and I'm glad you've given me the opportunity to say.
I think you did. You retweeted.
Did I retweet? I have no idea.
It's rather concerning. I have to tell you what you did. But anyway, and apologies for the language. Katie Hopkins called the London mayor, quotes, our nipple height mayor of Londonistan. And you replied, thank you, Katie. Why?
I can't remember doing that. Probably because I'm so...
You can't remember doing that?
No, of course not. Nick, I tweet, or used to...
Do you remember liking a tweet that had the language, it's never too late to get London back, with a picture of Enoch Powell?
Yes, and I've explained that. It's never too late, which is what I'm saying to you. It is not too late to make London better again. We've got traffic jams left, right and centre. We've got the ULEZ expansion.
Are you a fan of Enoch Powell?
No, of course not.
But why? I don't understand. There was a picture of him, and you liked that tweet.
I know. If you're a serial tweeter, you tend to go through liking all sorts of things, and you sometimes read things and don't see it. If anybody is offended, then obviously I would apologise. But you
can't see why people would be offended with that. You say if anyone is offended.
Well,
I have to explain to you the offence.
No, because it wasn't intended, and this is the thing. If anybody
when you called Gemma Collins a stupid fat blonde woman, was that intended?
I was asking a question to Twitter as to who is this person, and I've apologised for that as well. People will throw these tweets at me, and I accept it. And if I've offended anybody, I apologise.
You keep saying "if" as if you can't realise that there is offence, Susan Hall.
Because
I'm sorry to say it again. Calling someone a stupid fat blonde woman, liking a picture of Enoch Powell, talking about the mayor. I apologise again. A nipple height mayor. You seem surprised people are offended.
Some people are, and some people aren't. Those that are offended, I didn't intend to cause any offence at all. But going back to Lauren...
To the broader question, can you represent Muslims? Can you represent women? Can you represent people? Susan Hall.
Yes, of course I can.
Explain to Lauren how.
And going back to Lauren,
yes,
of course,
please.
We've got an incredible Muslim community. We really do. And if I go back to saying if... To whoever was offended, I most sincerely apologise. I spent a lot of time in mosques, etc., because in London we're very, very lucky. We've got a really good multicultural community out there, and it brings extra depth to London.
Lauren, quick response from you before we move on.
I'm not going to lie, I'm not quite convinced. I think anyone in London from any minority group should be worried.
In October, Keir Starmer's attempt to define working class raised eyebrows, and Rishi Sunak came unstuck when Tom Swarbrick accused him of operating under a false consensus for 13 years. The PM's defence, throwing previous regimes under the bus.
Can I ask you about homes? Are you going to commit to a target for house building?
I say that the manifesto that I inherited committed us to delivering 1 million homes over this Parliament, and we are on track to deliver that.
You've got to build more than 300,000 to deliver that target by next December. There's been no year since that target of 300,000 a year was brought in.
I'm not quite sure your numbers are right, because the last time I had a look at this, we are on track to deliver the 1 million homes over this Parliament. And
look, the
place where house building is acutely not happening is in London, right? Under the Mayor Sadiq Khan's leadership, London is barely building just over half the homes that it needs, and that's why we stepped in, and I stepped in the summer.
Are wanting people Prime Minister, to build houses for this country now. It's all very well talking about the Labour Mayor. You're running the government. The Conservatives have been in charge for 13 years, and you haven't built the homes that you said they would.
Actually, Tom, we said we'd build 1 million homes, and all the data shows we're on track to deliver those 1 million homes. And we just a few weeks ago wanted to change a legacy EU law that we'd inherited that is currently blocking the building of 100,000 homes across the country, many of whom already have planning permission, and that was blocked by the Labour Party in the House of Lords. That is us trying to unlock house building across the country, as I said, homes which already have planning permission, a defective EU law, and at the first sign of a difficult decision, what did the Labour Party do? Yeah, they ran for the hills, right? And we are trying to
So the
to
EU is
unlock
stopping
those
us building homes?
It's a legacy EU law that is on our statute books. We need to pass a new law to correct it and unlock these 100,000 homes. They've been given planning permission all around the country. Now, we tried to change that. The Labour Party blocked that in the House of Lords. So if anyone wants to know, when push comes to shove, who's going to do the right thing for the long term of this country? Who is going to deliver the homes for our young people? We just had an example of that a couple of weeks ago. It was the Conservative Party and Conservative government that was trying to do that and blocked by Labour in the House of Lords.
Talking of delivery, I know you're a big cricket fan. So as well as England bringing home the Cricket World Cup, are you going to be in India by the end of the Cricket World Cup to deliver a trade deal?
I never put any arbitrary timelines on trade deals. That's not the right way to do negotiations. It doesn't help us. We're going to just keep going until we can get a deal that works for us. And that's been my approach to all these things. And we've taken advantage of Brexit to be the first European country to join the Trans-Pacific trade deal, which is an exciting opportunity.
Could you guarantee that trade deal with India would not have an increase or a carve-out in the number of visas that will be given to
you wouldn't expect me to comment on a trade negotiation on your radio station. Of course not, but we will all...
But would that be in people's interest?
We will make sure that we get a deal that works for the UK, right? And it's just an example of us taking forward... but again, I'm not going to comment on any of your speculation that we're going to get a trade deal that works for the country, and that's why we don't put arbitrary timelines on it. And that's one of the things I was talking about in my conference speech, taking advantage of the opportunities of Brexit. And hopefully we'll get onto the other policies I announced, whether it was tackling smoking.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to ask you whether you have smoked.
No.
You've never smoked at all?
No. But not that. But again, what relevance does that have to anything, right? That's not the issue here is about protecting our kids.
Sure.
And the point I was making is, we've got an opportunity to do something that will stop our kids growing up smoking. Smoking is the single biggest cause we have of death, disability and illness in the UK. It causes 1 in 4 cancers, 64,000 people die every year.
And what do you make of the criticism that Mrs Thatcher, who you evoked in your conference speech, would be turning in her grave at the thought of a Conservative Prime Minister reducing choice, reducing freedom?
Yeah, so look, I thought very hard about this. And again, I as I acknowledge, right, there'll be people who have disagreeing views on this, and I respect that. And actually had lots of support from lots of Conservatives for this policy over the past day or two since I announced it. But it kind of came down to this for me, is that I think unlike every other product that's legal, there's no safe level of smoking. It's not like other things. There's no safe amount of smoking that anyone can do. And the other thing is, I thought, and talking to people and thinking about it as a parent myself, if you talk to any parent and even people who smoke, and you ask them, do you want your kids to grow up to smoke? All of them would say no, of course not. And I had a chance to do something that would make that more likely to happen.
Is there a safe level of obesity?
And I thought I had a chance to do something that would make that happen, and that's why I wanted to take it. Again, it's the right long-term decision for the country. Smoking costs our NHS and society £17 billion a year. It's responsible for one NHS admission almost every minute. So look, this is something that in the long term will really benefit our country, and I'm pleased there's been a lot of support for it. And that's why, I said, this is an example of, as I said, doing things differently, taking a big decision. I know, as I said, there'll be criticism, and that's okay. But I think fundamentally that the Prime Minister, like me, should be doing these types of policies, these types of big decisions that can really change things for the better over time.
There's lots more I want to ask you, particularly about tax cuts. I know that you've said that you don't speculate on tax policy ahead of any autumn statements, so I wonder whether that's... But I noticed that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, suggested that if they were going to start cutting taxes, it would be businesses. Do you think that's the right priority?
I don't think that's what he said. You're probably slightly putting words in it.
He suggested that to my colleague Nick Ferrari.
I think that's probably reading it. I think Jeremy and I would say the same thing. Of course, as Conservatives, we want to bring taxes down for people. Of course we do want people to keep more of their own money. We have a very competitive environment for business taxes to make sure that businesses keep investing and creating jobs.
And that's going to happen. You're going to deliver that.
We've already delivered it. So
you've said in your conference speech you're going to deliver more tax cuts.
Yeah, and I also said very clearly that the best tax cut that I can deliver and Jeremy can deliver for the country right now is to halve inflation, because inflation is a thing that is causing prices to go up. Inflation is what's eating into people's pay packets, their savings. So the quicker we can bring inflation down, the better off everyone is going to feel. That's why it was the most important and first of my 5 priorities. And that's why I'm really pleased that we're making progress on it. The last few months of numbers show that inflation is now properly coming down. We've just got to stick to the plan and get it done, because I know things are tough, and this is the best way we can help people. This is the best tax cut we can deliver, is to halve inflation.
Don't call it a comeback. The fairly predictable sacking of Suella Braverman precipitated the incredibly unexpected return of David Cameron as he returned to the political scene as Foreign Secretary. Some were pleased, many were confused. JamesObrien, however, was quite angry about the whole thing.
Producers across the country are really, really struggling to find anybody prepared to speak in defence of either Suella Braverman or David Cameron's reappointment to the cabinet. I can't tell what it is that she's actually talking about, but my God, if Anne Widdecombe is on television, then I can tell you now, contacts books throughout Westminster and beyond have been shredded. Widdecombe is what you find. You get to the end of you phoned every possible guest to come onto a programme, and they've all said no, and then you ring them all again and beg, and they've all said no, and then in the corner of every newsroom in the country, there is a small red glass with a small red sort of pod with a glass front on it, and it says, in case of emergency, break glass. And if you break the glass, then inside you will find Anne Widdecombe's phone number, which means if you have failed utterly to get any vaguely sensible, respectable, or authoritative voice to answer a question that you as a programme editor feel needs answering, in this case either, why has he appointed David Cameron, or why was Suella Braverman trying to cause a race riot this morning, then Anne Widdecombe would be the last. What comes after the last resort? What comes after the last resort? It's a bit like asking, what do you find after you've scraped the bottom of the barrel? Soil, I suppose, or grit. But anyway, Anne Widdecombe I've now seen on both Sky News and the BBC, which means that although today feels like a significant moment in British politics, an awful lot of the problems that beset both the political and the media landscapes remain firmly in place. So, this is a very strange appointment. I think I may owe the boy wonder, Henry Riley, an apology, because I was suggesting earlier today when the announcement was first made that it is perhaps not quite as shocking as everybody thinks it is. For the Lord Carrington precedent, the fact that Peter Carrington was both a member of the House of Lords and the Secretary of State Foreign Secretary, I think, when the Argentinians invaded the Falklands, something which saw him resign in an instance of individual ministerial responsibility. But actually, the more I think about it, the stranger it appears. So here's my early analysis. He needs somebody who is going to be unquestionably loyal up to and including any ambitions to replace him. So David Cameron, unless I am made of jelly, David Cameron will not be eyeing the opportunity to take over as leader of the party and or Prime Minister in the event of Rishi Sunak coming a cropper. We can agree about that, right? So that's a given. And that's quite a small group of people. I mean, to be fair, when a Prime Minister appoints his senior team, almost everybody in it will have at least part of one eye on the prospect of taking over as Prime Minister. I mean, they all believe that they're somehow capable. Even Nadine Dorries would have thought at some point that she could have a crack at becoming, but they almost all do. Oddly, the only high-profile politician of the last few years who almost certainly never thought there was any chance whatsoever of becoming Prime Minister until he became leader of the Labour Party was probably Jeremy Corbyn, actually. And I say that as a compliment, not as a criticism. But the rest of them, if they're getting appointed to high office, they will always be thinking, as Johnson explained, if the ball breaks from the back of the scrum, then it may fall to me to pick it up and run with it. So he's loyal. He will be able to portray himself as prioritising party over personal interests, which is nonsense because he's been running around the world doing the bidding of very, very rich people, some of whom may or may not have been quite dodgy, practically since he hung up the prime ministerial pinny. So he's going to be loyal and he's not going to want to take over. And he's got very serious frontline experience. He was Prime Minister for 6 years. He won a general election. So he's got somehow, despite us all thinking of him as one of the greatest losers of modern times, he does have electoral victory, 1.5 electoral victories. He won one general election outright, and he won one to the degree that he was able to form a coalition government to get a working majority in Parliament. So, I mean, odd though it may seem to younger listeners, he is perceived in some quarters as a winner. He lost the referendum the year after he won the general election, but he did win the general election. He delivered a decent majority against the odds and against Ed Miliband. Chaos, remember? Chaos with Ed Miliband. That was his catchphrase. Vote for me and avoid chaos with Ed Miliband, said David Cameron in 2015. Whew. And then just look at the next 8 years that unravelled after that pronouncement. So there's that. So experience... Status, like it or not, he fits the dictionary definition of a statesman, even of an elder statesman. He is a former prime minister. Didn't have that many big jobs before becoming prime minister, oddly, before becoming leader of the party, but that's partly because the Tories were in opposition for so long, and a lot of that generation rose in opposition. So power. He has experience of power, and his loyalty is unquestioned. So we'll put that on one side of the scale, right? Now, the bit where I get befuddled, the bit where I get confused, is when we start assembling the weights to go on the other side of the scale, which could be loosely described as baggage. The baggage that David Cameron brings now to the Foreign Office is surely going to outweigh the questionable notion that he is a genuine statesman and or a winner, a proven winner, and the loyalty, which I think is a given. That's the thing that I don't think is challengeable. Listen, it's a phone-in. You can challenge it if you want, but I cannot for the life of me imagine seeing David Cameron pitching for Rishi Sunak's job anytime soon. So you've got loyalty and absence of leadership ambitions, plus experience and statesman-like record. That's on one side of the scales. Now, on the other side of the scales, you've got austerity and Brexit. Now, friend Gary... he probably thinks austerity and Brexit were a good idea, but I think it's fair to say that the constituency of people still clinging to that obvious nonsense is both shrinking and probably irredeemable now. If you're not ready to admit that austerity was a disaster and that Brexit is an unfolding disaster, then I don't know that reality is ever going to breach the processed pork products that pass for your brain. So who exactly looks at David Cameron's baggage and doesn't see a problem? Well, exactly, because he also campaigned for Remain. So even if you're a mutton-headed member of the ERG and you still think that austerity and Brexit were good ideas, you can't forgive him for being the leader of the Remain campaign, or the de facto leader of the Remain campaign. And he is woke, I suppose, or wet, or whatever the word of the week is to describe people who don't join in with the feasting on racist red meat that Suella Braverman has been serving up for the last couple of weeks. So why has he done it? Most recently, it was the Greensill scandal. He made a reported £3.3 million from shares in a company that subsequently collapsed. MPs report. Listen, this matters, I know it's a bit of a stuck record. An MP's report in 2021, I think it was July, accused Mr. Cameron of and I quote, significant lack of judgment in lobbying the government on behalf of the company. He was employed by this outfit called Greensill. In 2020, he tried to persuade ministers to let Greensill join a scheme called the Corporate COVID Financing Facility, which was basically loans issued on incredibly preferential terms and insured by the government. And they failed. They were unsuccessful. He was unsuccessful in securing these cushy little loans for the company's founder, Lex Greensill. And then by 2021, the entire company collapsed with the loss of 440 jobs and possible £1 billion losses for investors. But although he won't tell us how much he was paid, that's the point, He's now coming back as Foreign Secretary with a financial scandal in his near past and a refusal to tell us how much he was paid by that company anyway. It's quite incredible. He has said that he was paid far more than his salary as Prime Minister. It was Panorama that found a letter from Greensill Capital to David Cameron, which suggests that he made £3.29 million after selling a bunch of shares he was given in the now collapsed company in 2019. This isn't normal. Well, maybe it is, but it's not right. So that's just one bit of baggage that you probably had forgotten about or didn't know about in the first place. So forget austerity and Brexit. We've got here taking millions of pounds from a company that went bust, and for which he sought to secure cushy government-insured loans. No breaching of the rules, but a significant lack of judgment. The most recent thing that British members of Parliament have said about David Cameron was that he demonstrated a significant lack of judgment in lobbying the government on behalf of a company that shortly afterwards went bust. So Rishi Sunak's made him Foreign Secretary. What's that you've got there, Dave? Oh, a significant lack of judgment, Rishi. Excellent. And £3.29 million. Now, that's the kind of language I talk. Would you like to be Foreign Secretary? Can I have a seat in the House of Lords? Of course you can. We'll make you a baron. Off you go. Jobs are good 'un. Who waves their little nylon flag at this one, I wonder? Theresa May has come out with some warm words, but you can kind of understand why. She's nostalgic for the days when her party wasn't ruled over by obviously ridiculous individuals. Cameron is ridiculous, but not obviously so. Who cheers this? That's a question for the ages. Who cheers this? 0345 6060 973. So those are your two questions. Number one, why has Rishi Sunak made David Cameron Foreign Secretary? And I want serious answers only. That's not true. I'll take silly answers as well. 0345 6060 973. And the second question is, who cheers this? Seriously. Just like politically. Who in the party, the country, or even on Fleet Street? Who cheers this? Now, the News International, News Corps, or whatever they're called at the moment, they historically love him. Cameron made Andy Coulson his Director of Communications shortly before Andy Coulson went to jail for his deep involvement in the phone hacking scandals. His boss, Rebecca Wade, was writing to David Cameron before a big conference speech saying that they couldn't wait to work together. That's fair enough, you know. What's the point in operating a massive media organisation if you can't keep a Prime Minister in your pocket? But I don't know if they still like him now. I don't know if they still sort of have suppers together or if they still... So who cheers this? That's the same question in a way. Because if you tell me who cheers this, then the question of why has Rishi Sunak appointed David Cameron as Foreign Secretary possibly becomes easier to answer. But right now, I've got nothing.
The year finished much like it started, with another governmental departure. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick stood down, believing the plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda didn't go far enough. Like the Hydra, two ministers took his place. Tom Pursglove was one of them. Nick Ferrari tried to get some answers from the new minister. He didn't get very far, though.
How come costs have increased to £300 million, Minister?
We always said that the partnership both was focused on migration but also an economic development partnership, and we think it's right that we support that economic development piece. We obviously want to relocate people to Rwanda as part of the agreement, but also some of that money is spent on the setup costs and making sure that the capacity is there on the ground in Rwanda to be able to administer this scheme at the first possible opportunity. And also, of course, some of that is money that we have put towards responding some of the very direct challenges that the Supreme Court raised, all of which have been addressed as part of the treaty and which we are then dealing with also through this bill.
How many Rwandans are we taking in return?
So we have said consistently from the very outset that we would be willing to take a very small number of people from Rwanda. For example, if people had complex needs that couldn't be met in Rwanda that we could perhaps better meet here in the United Kingdom. But people should expect a very, very small number of people to come through that part of the agreement.
What is a very, very small number, Minister?
I'm not going to speculate and put a figure on that.
Why?
But people should have in mind that this is going to be a very small number of people that we would be willing to accept in that direction.
50?
I'm not going to speculate on a figure,
so
but I'm saying is a very small...
But there's no cap then?
There isn't, but what I think is crucial in this is that, you know, what we've said, we're acting in good faith. This is a partnership. If, for example, there is somebody in Rwanda that we can support more effectively, then we would be willing to consider that as part of this agreement because we're acting in good faith. And I think, you know, the Rwandan government should be very strongly praised for wanting to be a part of the solution to ending these terrible criminal gang organised crossings of the Channel, wanting to save lives and wanting to be part of the answer. And I think that that's a very commendable endeavour of itself.
Let's look at the other side of the two-way traffic then. What are the number of people, when it's successful, that you hope to be moving to Rwanda per annum?
So again, there's not a precise figure on that, but this is why we are investing in capacity, working with the Rwandan government to make sure that we can operate this partnership in a way that is successful. I hope what it will do is to help put out of business the criminal gangs that organise these crossings by ending that link between getting in a small boat, crossing the channel, and assuming that once you get here, you're going to be able to stay.
But you and your colleagues must have sat down and have a target figure for what you would hope for. I'm going to say, for the purpose of debate, 20 a month. What are you working to?
I am sure that the new Minister for Illegal Migration will be continuing the conversations with the Rwandan government and with the team on our side.
I find this extraordinary that there's not even an ambition that by the end of year one we will have 250 people there or we will have 500 people there. This has never been discussed by the Prime Minister or anybody else. We have no idea. Nobody actually has numbers for anything. Oh, no, you do. £300 million that it's cost, and we don't have numbers of how many people are going that way or how many are coming back. And you portray this as a success to the country, do you?
Well, let me set that £300 million figure, Nick, in context. So at the moment, we are spending £8 million a day on the asylum system. When you consider it against that backdrop, those costs will only go up. If this remains the status quo, I'm sure that those asylum costs will only go up. This is a key part of us responding to that challenge. I think that this will be value for money. I do think it's the right investment that we're making to make sure that the arrangements are robust, that we can get people to Rwanda. We want to do that as quickly as possible. That's the ambition, that's determination, and that's what we're going to do.
All right, I sense I'm not going to donate numbers. Let's look at other matters. The Prime Minister confirmed yesterday that next week's vote on this Rwanda legislation will not be a confidence vote in him. Why doesn't he have the confidence to have a confidence vote? What does that tell us?
Well, I think that there's actually a unity of purpose in the Conservative Party in Parliament
Have you
to
spoken
deliver
with Shelagh
on this
Fogarty
issue.
lately with your unity of purpose?
Well, I recognise that colleagues have different views on specific aspects of the legislation, but there is an absolute determination amongst us that these crossings have to stop, that the status quo is not a tenable situation in terms of the channel crossings. The risk to life is unacceptable. The costs are exorbitant and must come down. And I think that what will happen is Conservative colleagues will rally around the fact that the PM is keeping to the promises that he made to the country. Voters, I think, expect us to deliver on this. And there is a unity of purpose to make sure that we see through the promises that we made.
All right. I mean, the unity of purpose, you'll be aware, the Prime Minister addressed the 1922 committee. Then a couple of hours later, the Immigration Minister quits. He's not prepared, it would seem, to have a confidence vote. And yet you're saying there's and you have senior Conservative figures questioning the direction of travel, and you're telling me it's a unified party.
I think that all of us on the Conservative benches want to see an end to these crossings. And I think it's worth adding, actually. I mean, I have huge respect for Robert Jenrick. He is a valued colleague and I consider him to be a friend. We perhaps disagree on elements of this, but I think you also have to look at the fact that Lord Sumption, for example, has come forward and says that he thinks that this piece of legislation will do the job that we intend it to. So there are differences of opinion out there as to that. But I believe that what this will do is assert Parliament's view that Rwanda is a safe country, close off those avenues where people have been getting on the merry-go-round of trying to frustrate their removal from the UK, and help us to make really meaningful progress that I think the public desperately wants to see.
That was LBC's look back at 2023. With a double election in the UK and the US to look forward to, there's likely to be even more political strife ahead of us.